what was looking at him was not a medical professional. In fact, what was looking at him was not a human at all. Let me start by addressing something. While I was making the research about today's story, I was so skeptical that all the time my mind was telling me, no way, this cannot be true, until I got the police report, which confirms that indeed an alien abduction had taken place. But what does this even mean? I mean, if a police official confirms that alien abductions are real, does this confirm that aliens are real? Let's find out. Stick until the end of today's video, as you wouldn't want to miss the plot twist. Hello my friend, and thank you for clicking on my video. My name is Julian and this is Untypical Stories. If you're interested in true crimes, mysteries and the supernatural, you come to the right place. Every week I sit down and share with you amazing stories that cover those topics. If that's of interest to you, please smash this like button and also please subscribe to my channel and turn all the notifications, as you wouldn't want to miss any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into today's story. On November 5th, 1975, 7-man logging crew were driving home from working in Sitgreaves National Park, near Snowflake, Arizona. One of the men, Travis Walton, was 22 at the time. He was the so-called alpha in the group, as he already had a reputation as a very bad boy. You know, he was one of those guys who were driving Harley Davidson motorcycles down the streets, and most guys were avoiding any confrontations with him, as he was a boxer. And also everyone in Snowflake knew that story about Travis, when once he was with his friends driving down a road, when all of a sudden a bear jumped out of the woods, landing in the middle of the road, and Travis would jump out of the car and would chase this bear into the woods. I mean, he was a tough guy, and so it's needless to say that Travis was not someone that would get scared easily by anything really. Despite his reputation as a bad boy, there was also something else well known in Snowflake. Travis was loved by almost everyone, and especially by his friends. By all accounts, Travis and the rest of those guys, I mean, they were doing pretty dangerous jobs, as operating chainsaws and cutting massive trees is not an easy task. Put in other words, those men were not the type that would make up stories. In fact, they had to be very level-headed, first because if they're not, this might jeopardize their position, but also because in a small town such as Snowflake, your reputation meant a lot. That evening, they had to do extra hours, as the project that were given to them by their boss Mike Rogers was so big that even after 3 days of constant cutting, they were still way behind. That's why they decided to stay few hours more until dark. So finally they decided to head home, and they all get in the truck. They start driving the way out to get on the main road and drive back to the town. So as they drive, they start joking and unwinding from the stressful day, when they look off to the right and see this bright light coming from the forest. They didn't think much of it. They even thought that it is the moon. But as they carry on driving, the light got brighter and brighter, and this makes them start commenting on it. So while they were trying to convince themselves that it is the moon, one of the guys look on the left side and say, "No guys, the moon is over there," and point at the moon, which was clearly on their left side. So they all look at the moon and are like, okay, it's not the moon, but what is it? They start going through different theories about what could be the source of this mysterious, very bright light, when another guy suggested it must be wildfire, but Mike quickly pointed that there was a lack of smoke, so it couldn't be wildfire. And as you already know, Travis, the one that is chasing bears and is like so bold, he says, why don't we just drive over there and see what is it? Not everyone was down with the idea, but after Travis insisted, they finally agreed and headed towards the light source. So they drive down to this road that leads to the lights and come to a clearing just a few meters away from the lights. All look at the light and they're completely and utterly stunned at what they see. Further down the story, during the investigation, you would find that all of them undertook lie detector tests separately regarding what they saw. Some of them even twice, and all of them passed the polygraph test 100% without fail. Every single one of these 7 men described the same thing. To all 7 accounts, the polygraph test showed that they all told the truth. I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to emphasize this, as what comes next is completely mind-blowing. What they said they saw was this disc-shaped craft with perfectly symmetrical panels underneath that was illuminating this light. And it was like floating in the air, not flying, but it was more like hovering. It didn't make any sound, it just sat there, defying any laws of physics. It appeared to them that this craft was like suspended in mid-air. One of the guys used to work as a builder and he knew a bit about, engineering, and he would comment on the structural framework of this ship. He would say how immaculate it was and impressive. All of them agreed that this was extremely beautiful machine, unlike anything they ever saw in their life. At one point, Travis got so mesmerized of what he see that he decides to go closer to the spacecraft and examine it. No one even noticed that Travis was walking towards the ship at first, as they felt unable to stop looking themselves at this astonishing view before their eyes. Travis would say later on in an interview that when he was walking towards the ship, he felt both fear and curiosity and couldn't stop himself from walking further towards it. He knew he was looking towards something no one has ever seen before, and although every being of his body was telling him to run, his curiosity was overwhelming. He needed to see this thing up close. So as he's walking closer and closer to this craft, some of the other guys come off their staring trance and start yelling to Travis to come back. One of them would say that he had a really bad sense that something bad would happen very soon if Travis keeps walking towards this ship. So very soon everyone starts screaming and yelling to Travis to come back, but Travis won't pay any attention to their screams and would carry on walking towards it. When all of a sudden the panels that were underneath the ship start to move slowly and spin clockwise. At that point, Travis was already directly underneath the ship, and his friends would go into extreme state of panic, but their screams would get replaced by this loud sound emanating from the craft. Travis now knew he has to go back, and he felt the danger, but as he just started retrieving away from the ship, all of a sudden a beam of light comes out and struck Travis like a lightning strike. While all of his friends are looking in disbelief, Travis gets lifted off the ground and thrown 20 feet away. Remember guys, all of them took a lie detector polygraph test and all of them passed it with 100% accuracy. All of them would say that he was hit by a ray of light and thrown 20 feet away. I know it sounds awful, but in a state of panic, all of the crew along with Mike Rogers decide to leave. So as they're driving back towards the main road, they're convincing themselves that Travis is dead, as they saw him being thrown away by this beam of light, and all they can think of is how to leave this place quicker. Mike was driving, and while everyone is screaming and panicking, he hit the brakes. He turned to all of them and he said, "We have to go back for him." He was like, "If you guys want to stay here, that's fine, but this truck is going back to get Travis." So for a moment they sit and they look at Mike, and in their mind they start going again through what they just witnessed, and the idea of them staying in the open start to sink in, and they quickly agreed with Mike to go and retrieve Travis' body. So they go back in the truck, turn around and start driving towards Travis. As they start approaching the UFO sightings, they notice that the light was gone it was no longer there, which gives them a little bit of a relief that the craft is gone. They start looking for Travis, but now there was no sight of Travis. Mike started to cry as he felt like they just abandoned him, and also for the fact that Travis was nowhere to be found. I mean, he was completely gone, vanished. Where did he go? Everyone starts screaming for Travis, but to no avail. Travis was not there. After looking for some time, they start wondering what to do. And this is when Mike said that they have to tell the police. Everyone looked at each other as they all knew very well this would look very bad for them when they tell the police. They knew that the story of seeing a UFO that struck their friend with a beam of light, it won't go very well with the police. And especially that he's now nowhere to be found. This definitely wouldn't sit very well with the police. But because they really wanted to find Travis and because they were getting considerably concerned about him, they knew they have to inform the police. So they start, driving back and get to a paid phone, and one of the guys, Ken Patterson, decides to take the initiative and call the police. Ken was known to be a very simple guy and not problematic at all, and even recently married. So he calls the sheriff's department, and all he could say is, you have to come up here. We cannot find our friend Travis, and we would have to describe the situation to you when you get here, because trying to do it over the phone, it wouldn't do it a justice. But he's gone, and we don't know where he went. So shortly after, Sheriff Marlin Gillespie and Ken Coplin show up. They get to the scene, and they're like, alright, tell us what happened. When the police looked at the crew, they all looked distraught, and Ken started to describe what they all went through, but was trying to avoid words like aliens or UFO or the light, anything like that. She was just trying to kind of describe the situation, but he was stumbling a lot. So then Mike jumps on and screams, we saw a UFO, and a beam of light hit Travis, and then shortly after he disappeared. The sheriffs looked at each other and they were like, really? Is this what you saw? A UFO? The first thing the sheriffs thought was that this is some sort of a prank, and even one of them proceeded to say that if you are wasting the time of the police, this is classified as a criminal offense. But they look at the 6 men, and it was obvious that they are seriously traumatized, and certainly Travis was missing. So one of the sheriffs said, look guys, we need to search your truck and we need to make sure that you're not under the influence of something. And everyone was like, yes sir, we haven't done anything, we haven't smoked anything, please do search whatever you need, just help us find Travis. The sheriff searched the truck and they found nothing. They searched them and still found nothing. Even their field check showed that they were all sober. So the sheriff Gillespie, who was the one in charge, who was also a total skeptic, pulled the other sheriff aside and told him, listen, this might be a real crime and they might be trying to create this fiasco to cover it up. So we definitely need to look into it. So he strongly believed that they harmed Travis and they're using this UFO story to cover it up. But also he was thinking that it was a very bad joke if it was a joke at all, and all their stories are not lining up, and they can't even explain what they saw. The only thing from this whole situation was that he couldn't deny they all looked very scared. So a couple of hours later, the sun shows up and the sheriffs organize this massive search, and they all go to look the area where Travis went missing. This was one of the biggest searches of all time for the town of Snowflake. There were hundreds of volunteers and dogs, and they looked absolutely everywhere. They scored the entire area, but there was no sign of Travis. So both sheriffs, still convinced that this is some sort of a hoax, go to the 6 crew and start negotiating with them. One of the sheriffs even offered them, if they say where Travis' body is, they will go easy on them. And he even point blank pointed them, and he's like, we know you did it, just tell us where he is. The crew knew very well that if they don't find Travis, they all will suffer serious problems and their lives will be ruined. It's just how the world operates. You can't just go and report someone missing and say that, aliens are to be blamed. It doesn't work like that. The crew was extremely worried and they're thinking, our lives are ruined. Of course, they were also worried about Travis, but they just knew they're effed up. But during the searching, something very weird happened that also cannot be explained. So the guys are searching for Travis, and at one point, Mike would see those 3 men wearing red jackets and scanning the area where Travis was thrown away with some sort of metal detectors. The first thing he thought was that those are some sort of a paranormal investigators. He calls the rest of the crew and goes to talk to these 3 red jacket men. So Mike asked them, hey, what are those that you're using? And one of them will tell him that those are radiation detectors. And he asked them, are you guys with the sheriff's department? But they don't answer. They just informed him that they're checking for radiation. So Mike started to think, we were so close to this ship, we might have absorbed some of the radiation, and asked the red jacket men to scan, their jackets and explain that they were very close to this ship. So one of the men with the red jacket starts scanning them, with this metal detector, but there was nothing. And then Mike remembers that they got home and changed, so the radiation is not on them. However, he had his hat at his truck and asked them to scan his hat as he wore it the night prior. As soon as the machine hovered over his hat, the meter that was on the machine just shoot to the top all the way to the 100. So the guy with the red jacket looked at the number. He was a little bit surprised. He looked at Mike, turned to the other 2 guys and tell them to stop scanning, and they just proceed to leave without saying even one word. Mike was like, hey, what does this even mean? Where are you going? But they just ignored him and they just left. So Mike and the crew decides to go to the sheriffs and ask who were those men with the red jackets. Even though the sheriffs didn't believe them so far and blamed them for whatever happened to Travis, those guys with the red jackets, detected the radiation, which would prove that something was off. So they go to the sheriffs and they're like, who are those with the red jackets? They measure the radiation on my hat, and the meter just shoot to the roof on their machines. The sheriffs were like, what guys with the red jackets? The crew proceeded to explain, but sheriffs started to get more and more agitated, as in their mind those 6 are orchestrating different stories and only waste their time. So the sheriffs decides to pull off the search. The whole town of Snowflake at that point, everyone was getting more and more convinced that those 6 men heard Travis and are fooling around everyone with their stories. The whole town turned against them, and everyone believed they were the ones responsible for the disappearance of Travis. Not even one believed that the UFO stories those guys were spreading is real. People just believed that they harmed Travis and they're trying to cover it up with the nonsense stories. The sheriffs also didn't help the situation, as they were announcing that there is no such thing as a UFO or alien abduction, and that most likely those 6 individuals harmed Travis and hid him somewhere. You can imagine that this type of claims would attract some interest, and it did. National and international media pick up the case, and it was everywhere. On the newsletters, on the television, even the radio broadcast the mysterious alien abduction of Travis everywhere. Even though at that point there was no evidence regarding the abduction, even the slightest. The 2 sheriffs were getting even more frustrated now that the news spread everywhere, and they were just 100% convinced and certain that there is nothing here, only a missing kid, and all of the news media were taking advantage of this tragedy. So in the end, Sheriff Gillespie decides that enough is enough with the nonsense and will prove to the world that those are 6 criminals, and will get them to confess their crime by all means necessary. Everyone had to take a lie detector test. The sheriffs searched for the best polygraph examiner out there to administer the lie detector test. So all 6 of the men go through the test, and while they were taking the test, the 2 sheriffs even confidently discussed between them that, they caught them, and after the test proved they're lying, they would have no other choice but to show where Travis' body is. So after the test finished, the polygraph examiner would call the sheriffs, and what he'd tell them next would upset the sheriffs even more. This was considered one of the best examiners in the state, and he had between 92 and 98% accuracy rate. He would tell them that 5 out of the 6 examined would pass the test 100%, and the 6th was just inconclusive, which meant that the test wasn't done very well. But it didn't prove that he's lying. So the examiner confidently would inform the sheriffs that those 6 men are not lying. They are telling the truth. They saw spacecraft hovering above the ground. They saw this spacecraft blasting Travis with a beam of light, and the examiner would finish his meeting with the sheriffs with the statement, "It would be so difficult to fake my polygraph test, and the fact that 5 out of 6 passed with 100%, I would say it's impossible." So this did not leave any room for the sheriffs to question how likely it is to fake the test. Sheriff Gillespie was dumbfounded. He was so convinced they're lying that this new revelation in the case kind of shook him a bit. He was like, now what we do? 5 days would pass after Travis disappeared, and out of nowhere, guess what? Travis showed up. He would wake up on the road, just in the same place where the craft shoot him with this beam of light. He would look up in the sky and would see the same panels just drifting further away and disappearing into the distance. At first, he wouldn't recognize where he is, as it was night and also it was like raining. Not knowing what to do, he would just try to run away from the spot, but would find himself unable to do so, as he would find himself extremely weak, dehydrated and hungry. His mind at that point would focus on getting to civilization and would remember a paid phones at the rest stop not far away from where he was. So he gathered all his strength and starts to walk. He gets to the phones and he checks his pockets and he finds some change. He gets in the phone and dial his brother. His brother was completely shocked when hearing Travis' voice. He even didn't believe that it was Travis, as everyone was expecting Travis to be dead. But Travis just kept repeating, it's me, they brought me back. So Travis' brother would say, okay, just stay where you are, I'm coming. When Travis' brother picked him up, Travis was not aware for how long he's been gone. He even thought it was the same night as the initial abduction. But his brother would shoot him with dozens of questions and would be like, where have you been, man? We've been all worried sick about you for the past few days. There were hundreds of people looking for you. And Travis, confused, would be like, what do you mean for the past couple of days? Hundreds of people have been looking for me. And this is when his brother would turn to Travis and would tell him he's been missing for the past 5 days. This news would shock Travis so much that, they would send him into a catatonic state. Travis' brother was looking at him and tried to ask him some more questions, but Travis was unresponsive. Travis didn't know what to say to him. For him, the whole ordeal was no more than few minutes. So he just couldn't explain it. Concerned, Travis' brother decided instead of calling the police, he would take his brother to the local hospital, as he felt Travis doesn't look very well. When they get to the hospital, Travis' brother asked the doctors to be, discreet, as all the media fiasco might get out of hand, and if they find out that Travis is back, then most certainly the whole hospital will be occupied by, all this media. But even the doctors, they knew who Travis was, and they were fascinated and wanted to talk to him and wanted to examine him. The doctors would say that Travis is very malnourished and seems tired and appear very sick, But there are no physical wounds except for one. It was a little cut in his arm that resembled a puncture site from a needle. Travis was tested for drugs and alcohol in his system, but he was clear from any drug substances. The only explanation that the doctors could have come up with is that somebody had just put injection needle in his arm. After the examination, Travis' brother brings Travis home in Phoenix, Arizona, and as soon as they get back, the phone would ring dozens of times. Like, people knew that Travis was back. Of course, this would get to the sheriff's ears in Snowflake, and they would bombard Travis' brother with phone calls as well. After the sheriffs made contact with Travis' brother, they insisted to go and talk to him because the investigation is still ongoing. So Sheriff Gillespie drives all the way to Phoenix and finally get to sit down and talk to Travis. And at first, Travis was still confused and still couldn't remember anything really during the time he was missing. But slowly glimpses started to pop up in his head, but not enough to describe in details exactly what had happened to him. Sheriff Gillespie at first tried to calm down Travis as he sensed that Travis was still in shock. He tried slowly, bit by bit, to question Travis in a way not to overwhelm him, but even that technique didn't work. It would seem that Travis just doesn't remember anything. Travis tried to recollect the events in his mind, but all he could remember was the UFO and the light of beam that struck him, but after that would go blank. And then he's back. Sheriff Gillespie did not give up, but knew he cannot arrest him, and informed him they would be in touch. Not long after, the news outlets would start to show up at his brother's house, and different reporters. Even at some point, there were so many news trucks outside Travis' brother's house that they felt trapped inside the house. Finally, the National Enquirer contacted them and said, if you give us an exclusive story, we will get you out of here and we'll bring you to a private location, and we would pay for Travis to have another whole set of tests that are not typically done to see if they can figure it out what had happened to him. So, Travis agreed to go with the National Enquirer. So by the time Travis get to speak to the National Enquirer, some time has passed, and Travis used that time to try to remember what exactly happened to him. This time seemed to pay off, as flashes of memories of what had happened start to form in his mind. He starts to remember bit by bit what happened during those 5 days. So it's time for Travis to sit down and speak to the National Enquirer, and what he would say next would make even the boldest of you feel shivers down your spine. After the light beam threw him 20 feet away, he would land face down, and as he, tried to lift himself from the ground, he would see the underneath of the spacecraft directly on top of him, and it's massive. And then there would be another bright light striking him, but instead of throwing him, this one would lift him gently from the ground and would carry him to the inside of this craft. The next thing he remembered is, he's lying down on some sort of operational table with few doctors around him, and at that time he would think that probably the initial light beam probably hurt him, and now the doctors are trying to save his life. He says doctors due to the way they were dressed in white coats and masks, and by the way they were moving. By all accounts, they looked all like medical professionals, and it was clear to him that they were examining him. He thought that they were examining the damage from the light beam. After a few seconds, his vision from blurry would start to clear up, and he would look down his chest, and he sees this rectangular box sitting on his chest that he has never seen before anywhere. It didn't look anything like any medical equipment he has ever seen or heard of. It looked more like a rock sitting on his chest. So he looked at that, and then he moved his gaze to one of the doctors who was working on this triangular box, and this medical professional would notice Travis is awake, and he would lean in to look at Travis closer. This second, Travis is petrified. What was looking at him was not a medical professional. In fact, what was looking at him was not a human at all. He would describe that being to be grayish, narrow-headed figure that is very short, maybe around a meter tall, that was looking at him with these eyes that were like slits. Travis, who is completely shocked and scared, pushed everything, tries to, to rip all the cords that, they were attached to him. So he jumps off the table and grabs one of the tools that, he could find next to him, and he's like taken into attack position and ready to attack these little creatures. He's scared, but in the same time he knows that he need to defend himself. He don't even know what he's looking at. So without releasing this attacking position ready to attack, he start looking around to see where he is, and he would realize that he's in a very tiny, quiet, small room, and that the only light source in this little tiny room is the lamp that is above the surgical table. The panic starts to sink in even deeper, and he starts like waving with that instrument in his hand at the three small humanoid figures in front of him, and start to scream to leave him alone and to get away from him, and he even demanded to let him go. But those three creatures, they were unfazed by his reaction. They start even walking towards him closer and closer, and appeared like observing him. He's waving and he's just about to hit one of them, when all of a sudden, without warning, all the three of them just turn around and leave the room. He saw them turning left, and he's thinking, if I stay in this room, something bad would happen to me. So he decides the best thing to do is to look for a way out of here. So he leaves the room, but turns right and starts looking for doors or any exit. He gets to another room, and all he could see in that room was this like very big chair. He goes to it, he peers a little, and sees that no one is sitting in it. He starts searching there for a doorknob or just any doors that might lead him out of this place, but there was nothing. He says that everything was just perfectly smooth and glossy. He goes back now to this chair, and he sees that there's buttons on this chair, and he starts pressing them with hopes that one of those buttons might open some sort of door, but nothing happened. Then on the door where he came in, suddenly there was this person. A man appeared, and he looked like he's wearing a spacesuit, like very similar to an astronaut spacesuit. But Travis was so relieved that he saw this man as he was a human. Travis thought that this human is there to save him. Travis runs to this man and is excited and still in a panic, but start to scream at this human, please, you have to help me, I'm begging you, there is this very weird small little creatures, please, you have to help me. And he also start to ask him, where are we, what is this place, what's going on? But the man does not respond to Travis. So Travis pulled himself back from this man to observe this man, and he looked at his eyes, and he noticed that they're distant, like he was in a trance. Without any words, the man grabs Travis for the arm and turns around and starts to walk down the corridor for the opposite direction from where the operational table was. Travis doesn't know what to do, but decides to follow the man because he's the only other human he had seen in this place, and also because he didn't want to be alone. They get to another door, and from there to another corridor. Travis now is thinking that this man, although not talking to him, is helping him, as this corridor was looking like a possible exit corridor. They get to another door and go down to this huge hangar where Travis sees all these spacecrafts that look just like the one he had seen on the field. He said there were hundreds of them, hundreds of those spaceships. So the man leads Travis down to a huge corridor, and from either side of there, he's walking down this corridor, and from either side of this corridor there was just spacecrafts neatly hovering next to each other. He didn't say it, but from what I understood, they appeared like they were parked in this huge parking for spacecrafts, if you will. Travis was mesmerized by what he's seen, and he keeps asking this man, hey man, what is this place? Where are we going? But the man was just walking silently not saying a word. So they walk by the end of this hangar, this spacecraft parking, and before them there is another door. The man opens the door and there is this bright white room, and inside there are 3 more humans, and they also had this weird gaze in their eyes, like they're in some sort of a trance. They did not speak either, but Travis was happy. He thought that they're here to save him. They were humans after all. So the guy that brought him there continued to lead him to the 3 other people, and they pick him and put him on a table. At first, Travis starts to resist as he doesn't know why they tried to tie him to another one of those tables. He tries to resist, but he was weak already, and there were 4 of them. And so he was easily overpowered, and then one of them placed a gas mask on his face, and seconds later he blacks out again. His next memory after that is the loud sound of the spacecraft and seeing it drifting away in the distance. So at first Travis did not see his 6 friends as he was interviewed and all of that, but eventually he gets to see them, and when he tells them what his story is, what he went through, they were horrified, but also guilty for leaving him, on the field. Travis reassured them that he is not upset and he can't blame them, but regardless, this traumatizing event would drift all 7 of them away. They will not keep in touch, they will not be close. But even after 40 years, all 7 of them confirms that this is indeed what happened. Travis would also undertake a polygraph test, and without surprise, he would pass with 100%. In fact, Travis would take 5 different polygraph tests and he will pass all of them with 100%. You remember the one test that was inconclusive? That guy would take the test again and would pass it. A total of 16 polygraph tests would be done in the space of these 40 years since the encounter with this UFO, and sure enough, all of the 16 tests would be passed. You would think that although this case is one of the most believable in history, the people involved would have exciting lives and would shower in money, but no, it is the exact opposite. This incident actually ruined their lives, simply because people do not believe in this. Their careers would be ruined as people would label them as crazy. One of the people involved even was disowned by his own family as they didn't want to associate with him because people make comments. But despite all of that, 40 years later, at old age, all these 7 men still insist that what happened to Travis Walton on November 5th, 1975 indeed happened. None of them has ever retracted their statement. Needless to say, the police report reflected the 6 polygraph tests that were initially taken and conducted that indeed UFO abducted Travis Walton. Well, this will do it for today, guys, but please let me know down in the comments, do you believe Travis Walton, and do you think he was abducted by aliens? I'm extremely curious to find out. If you enjoyed the story, please like this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.